Welcome to the State Room, a podcast dedicated to discussing key policy issues and events affecting the future of our state. I'm your host, Scot Mussi. In today's episode of the State Room, we're going to be talking about one of the biggest issues impacting Arizona, border security. Poll after poll shows that it remains one of the top issues on voters' minds here in the state, and for good reason. When Joe Biden swung the borders open in 2021, millions of illegal immigrants came streaming into Arizona. With it, they brought drugs, they brought crime, and they brought extra costs for taxpayers. According to one cost analysis by the Federation for Immigration Reform, illegal immigration costs Arizona taxpayers over $3 billion each year. To talk to us today about border security and the impacts of illegal immigration on Arizona, we have with us today Sheriff Mark Lamb. Mark has spent his entire career in Arizona working in law enforcement and spent 8 years as the elected sheriff of Pinal County. Mark, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Scott. Look, this is right up my alley, and I love the studio, by the way. This is great. I'm a little studio envious.
Oh, well,
I do my YouTube stuff, but it doesn't look as good as this.
Anytime you want to come in, shoot a little clip, you're welcome to come in here.
This
and
is
do
great.
It, so.
Yeah, and thanks for having me in. As you know, this is something I'm passionate about, so thank you.
You've been a great friend of our organization, a great friend of the Free Enterprise Club. A story I often bring up just last year, or almost 2 years ago now, when we were fighting ranked choice voting. The California style elections, they wanted to bring that as Proposition 140 in November. Contacted multiple elected officials around the state, wanting to engage, help us out. When I called you up, it was, I want to help. How can I help? And not only that, you wanted to chair the committee on that. You wanted to take a lead on it. That was not the same conversation I had with many other elected officials in this state. You wanted to step up to the plate, and you did. And so thank you for that.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for what you did for really being the main driver behind making sure that didn't pass in Arizona. I don't think the average voter understands just how dangerous that could be, especially for a state like Arizona, which is really struggling with an identity right now. That ranked choice voting would have been very deceptive and would have been very destructive to the state. And so it was my honor to be able to be part of that. But thank you to the Free Enterprise Group and you for really championing that and taking it down, because we didn't need it. Ironically, it may bite California in the butt in this election, and they may end up with 2 Republicans in their ranked choice.
Yeah. It's ironic that the whole jungle primary system resulted in bringing down Eric Swalwell. I mean, that's what really brought him down. I mean, they didn't care about all this stuff when he was in Congress.
No.
But when it was, oh man, you might have a situation where 2 Republicans come out and they don't have a Democrat on the ticket. Okay, now the video starts surfacing about him and all his different sexcapades and everything else he was doing.
It's amazing when the powers that be decide that you're no longer part of the club, what they can do to you. And look, within a matter of a week, he dropped out of the race and dropped out of Congress. And it just shows you that if they decide they don't want you in their jungle primary, you're not going to be in it.
Yeah, when it comes to the left and the Democrats, you are selected, not elected.
That's right.
And so he was unselected.
It's a great way to say it. It's a great way to say it.
Well, let's just dive in here. Let's talk about the current situation at the border. And Mark, just from your perspective, have you been surprised how quickly things turned around or changed once Trump took office at the border?
I actually wasn't surprised. You know, there's plenty of interviews where they asked me this, Sheriff, how long do you think it'll take to turn this around? And I said, months. I honestly think that this could be an immediate impact. And we actually saw it prior to President Trump even being sworn in. We saw it as soon as the election happened. We started seeing a real difference in the border traffic and how the cartels were operating. They started shifting their business model. And so we saw an immediate impact even before he got into office. And once he got into office,
they knew it was coming.
They knew it was coming. And all of a sudden they realized no longer were they going to have these NGOs funding it, and all this other stuff that's going on. I know we're going to dive into that a little bit. But what they realized was there was a new sheriff in town. That's that old adage. And immediately when President Trump came in, and I thought the executive orders that he had signed into action the first day, I thought those were really great, like the Remain in Mexico and all of these different things that he did had an immediate impact. So yes, It did have an immediate impact, and no, I was not surprised that it happened so fast.
So then when you talk about this, you say Trump, how Trump was able to do this, because for years and years, all you'd hear from politicians in Washington was, oh, we can't really secure the border unless we do some sort of comprehensive or some sort of immigration reform package. Heck, during the election, that's what we saw. We saw, in the Senate, Republicans huddling with Democrats, rolling out this bipartisan package on border security, because that was the only way to do it. Total garbage. The bill legalized illegal immigration. It set thresholds to allow and basically say that it's okay to come in here illegally if you don't cross certain thresholds. Trump comes in day one, it all stops.
Right.
All stops.
It all stopped. And what we saw with that is we also saw a reduction in the fentanyl poisonings that were going on in this country, to the tune of 20 to 30% less fentanyl poisonings than what we had been seeing. We were pulling over, Scott, vehicles every day on the 10 and on our highways that were full of, they were load vehicles, human load vehicles, trafficking humans into this country. And all of a sudden that stopped. It tapered off. They went back to their old ways where they crossed through the reservation, and it's a much more difficult pass that they have to go through to get here. So all of that started changing immediately.
So we didn't need a new law, obviously.
We didn't need any bill power. We needed willpower. And I used to always say, no new laws. We don't need any new laws. Yes, we do need to solidify some of this stuff now, but we didn't need anything then.
For border security.
For border security. We already had, it was illegal to come into this country. Those things were already in place. All the codes were in place. All we had to do was actually had the willpower, not the bill power, but the willpower to actually enforce the law. And immediately we saw that with President Trump. We didn't need a new law. We needed a new leader. And we got it, and we saw immediately the positive impact at the border.
Okay, so maybe the cynic in me was maybe nobody had the willpower to do that because they wanted to drive the necessity for legislation in Washington.
Your point of the bipartisan bill, it makes your point. They were all benefiting from a bad border bill. They didn't really have the appetite or the will to fix it. They wanted to use money. This is government at its best. When they say, oh, we have a problem, we'll fix it for you. And then what do? They throw more laws and more money and more regulations that actually hurt the American people. And in the end, the problem never actually gets fixed. Immigration was getting worse up until that point, no matter how much they threw at it. It's the same with homelessness. In a lot of these states where they lack the willpower, they are continue to throw money at a problem. Government says we have a solution for you. Government never solves any problems. They just make problems worse.
Well, as far as what you're seeing at the border now, you mentioned the fentanyl, the reduction in fentanyl. Under Biden, millions were streaming into Arizona and other states throughout the country. What do the numbers look like today? What are we seeing on border crossings? What are we seeing as far as crime? Have we seen a reduction in crime, overall crime, trafficking? What does the landscape look like today here in Arizona?
So let me break it down to two things. So what we've always had in the past is you have your gotaways, then you have your people that get caught. And in the past, what has happened is those people were typically returned to the country or returned to Mexico or wherever. We didn't allow them to come in. Under the Biden administration, they allowed everybody to come in, whether they had a legitimate asylum claim. So there was a lot of false asylum claims, a lot of people claiming to be from countries they weren't really from, a lot of people that the Biden administration decided they just wanted to let into the country. And so that really became a major issue. So there's that group of people, and then there's the gotaways. We still will always have gotaways. You're always going to have people. This is what the cartel specializes in trafficking humans and drugs into this country. And they have their ways to do it. They do it through the reservation. There's no wall down there, so they just have to wait till the right time and they can get people through. So they went back to that immediately. They're not going to be able to traffic thousands of people like they were with the Biden administration. And so what the important number that the Trump administration talks about, which I think is the important number, is they have allowed 0 people that they have caught coming into the country illegally to stay in this country. They've either been returned to wherever they came from or pushed back to Mexico. And that is an important number. So we can't just catch and release. And that's what the Biden administration was doing, was this catch and release. Are we still always on a daily basis looking for groups of people that the cartel manages to slip through the cracks? Yes. And Border Patrol, now that they're not having to manage thousands of people coming across the border that the administration was allowing, now they can focus their efforts on finding those gotaways that are trying to sneak into this country.
As you go to the border, and you frequently are visiting the border and examining what's going on down there, when you interact with U.S. citizens, Americans that live near the border, that own ranches, what are they telling you now compared to what it was like a couple of years ago?
And I'm glad you asked that question, because a lot of people don't think about the impact it has on Americans who live along the border. Those ranchers were just fit to be tied. I mean, they were just people were coming into their property every day, cutting their fences, killing their cattle, leaving trash in their property. This was the reality for those people. Immediately they saw the impact, the positive impact. They're elated with the policies that the Trump administration has been able to put in place. They also understand that this could change if we don't solidify these changes into good laws long term. And there's the border piece of it, which is probably not this piece may be a little bit less needed laws. We already got a lot of good laws in place. We just got to enforce those laws. But there's the immigration piece that needs to be handled too. And we've got to get some common sense solutions to that piece as well. And so the families, these people that live on the border, they are very appreciative. Good. Now, we're still seeing Americans that are being killed every day, whether by people that are in this country illegally. And that has to stop. And that's why I think a majority of Americans still see this border issue, despite the fact that we've fixed a lot of it. They still see it as a very high priority, especially like now I go and speak to groups all across this state, and even frankly across the country. The border is still a major issue. And even more importantly, I was with a group of young kids the other day and I asked everybody in this group, what is your major concerns? And this kid really kind of surprised me. His number one concern was the border. And so this young generation still sees it as an issue as well. And so I still think this will have an impact in the next elections, because we really, while it's better and we're fixing it, we still have work to do to make sure that we fix it long term.
Absolutely, absolutely. Misconceptions about the border crackdown and what Trump's been doing. How different is the reality from what people are hearing in the media versus what's happening out there on the streets?
Well, if you look at the media only shows you a couple cities, and maybe Minneapolis was being one of them, really the highest, in the one that everybody saw, highest visual. You've got LA and a lot of these places. A lot of those problems are precipitated by the fact that the governments of those states have told local law enforcement you cannot work with the federal partners. And what do? You get an explosion in your community.
That's the key distinction then.
That's the key.
And that's one of the things you see here in Arizona. When you look in Arizona and you compare that to Minnesota, and I have actually a family that live in Minnesota and even in Minneapolis, and you're just watching what was happening there in November and December and January, and you would look what is happening in Arizona, and it just seemed two totally different situations.
It was two totally, and for that matter, ICE was removing people all over the country. But it was really only in a couple different cities that you were seeing on the media this uprising. It goes to show you a couple things, that where law enforcement wasn't working together with our federal partners, there was problems. And number two, these are paid agitators. These are very intentional protests. So groups of people are using these cities that they know they can get away with it in, and they're paying people to go out on the streets to stand and fight and obstruct against our federal law enforcement, because they know that the local law enforcement is probably not going to hold them accountable. And listen, the majority of what I see on TV in those clips, those people are breaking the law. When you obstruct law enforcement, this is not the First Amendment in the sense that the Founding Fathers designed. They said you have the right to assemble peaceably, and that you have the right to petition your government for a redress of grievances. If you have an issue with laws, then you should go into your congressman or your senator. They're the ones who pass the laws. But obstructing law enforcement, in most cases, what I saw was a violation of the law. Just because those people weren't in handcuffs doesn't mean they weren't breaking the law. The fact is that the federal government didn't have the resources to go arrest a ton of Americans who were protesting, and the local law enforcement in those areas was not assisting.
Because that should be the local law enforcement's role in that. And again, here in Arizona, we saw protests, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a free country. Anybody can go out and protest. You can go to the street for any policy you like or dislike. You can go and make your voices heard. But what was happening in Minneapolis, it was clear that there was direct interference with law enforcement operations. And I just think if anybody here locally, whether you be in Phoenix or any other municipality, was going around and trying to tip people off to when they know a local gang was operating, they're tipping them off when law enforcement was trying to show up and they're aiding them as they're whatever they were doing, I think that's a crime.
It's a crime. It is a crime. Like when you read the code, it's a crime. It's a federal crime, and in most cases, it's a state crime.
So then why were these people getting a pass? Just because local law enforcement was ignoring it, and then media, I would know better way to say it, was kind of covering for it and was ignoring the fact that they were trying to facilitate and letting people, lawbreakers, or in this case, illegal immigrants, get away.
You're exactly right. And there's two components to it, because the federal law, imagine if they started arresting all those Americans. Imagine, it would have been even worse on there. And so they're trying to just contain. They want to focus on the people that are here illegally, the people that have broken the law, and they're trying. And a lot of those people, by the way, were not good people. They were criminals in this country. They were here illegally, and they were criminals. If you don't believe me, go to dhs.gov/wow, worst of the worst, WOW, and you'll see the crimes that these people were getting charged with that they were looking for. Are there going to be collateral pickups where people are with them or in the same building that are here illegally? Yeah. And you know what? They have to arrest them because Congress and Senate said so. And so this is what they were doing. But the problem was the local law enforcement. I would say if I could identify what was making this go sideways, was two things: local law enforcement failing to work with the federal partners, and a lot of that, like California, where they've passed laws saying it's illegal for the cops to do it. That's a problem. And the second piece was whoever's paying for these people to be these agitators in these communities. You know, look, 2 people lost their lives. That ICE ended up taking the life of 2 people, and I think both of those were justified shoots, in my opinion. And I don't think that you'll see any charges. But those people wouldn't have died had somebody not paid them to be there. And I think if you dive into their bank accounts, you're going to find out that they were probably financially incentivized to be there. And those people were pawns in somebody else's larger game of trying to just disrupt what is going on with this administration and the removal of people. One more thing. The previous administrations, not that you all, I'm not a big believer in looking back and saying, well, they did it. But the Biden administration, the Obama administration, the Bush administration, the Clinton administration, all of them had removed far more people from this country that were here illegally than this administration has. And yet you didn't see that type of pushback. And so clearly this is a concerted effort. This is a very targeted and conspired effort to obstruct our law enforcement in doing their job.
And that seemed obvious to me. And we see this on the other side of it, and we've talked about it before there's this NGO syndicate, non-governmental organizations, well-funded by the left, that do all kinds of different operations here in the state. It's all coordinated. It's all by design. And it was obvious to me that this is what was happening, where you had these different groups, small subset of groups, all working together and coordinating on this, that this has to be some sort of NGO facilitated operation to engage in this resistance. And one of the—
Paid for by us.
Paid for by taxpayers. Yes, we end up funding a lot of that. And one piece of evidence that we identified on this, actually right when Trump was inaugurated, was here in Arizona. Trump shuts the border down, and immediately we started seeing news stories about groups popping up and opposing that border crackdown. But the funny thing was, as I'm reading these articles, is the groups they were highlighting I had never heard of before.
Yeah.
Normally, I've heard of pretty much all the groups that are out there. I operate in the political world. Never heard of these groups. We start digging, come to find out, one of the groups was a dormant group that didn't exist from 2020 to 2024 that magically now was in operation again. Funny how that works. Biden comes into office, they disappear. All of a sudden, they were back in operation. The other group was brand new. We dig a little bit more, come to find out, they're being funded by national liberal organizations, many of which are receiving money from the federal government. And so our taxpayer dollars were going to fund immediate opposition to the Trump crackdown here in Arizona.
When you ask about what don't the American people know about what was going on and what's going on, and I would say, first of all, one of the big misconceptions is that everybody's from Mexico or Guatemala or whatever. No, under the Biden administration, they were coming from Africa, China, from all over the world. They were coming from everywhere. So this isn't about a specific...
The Middle East, terrorists.
Terrorists. They're coming from Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Mauritania, which is one of the leading breeding grounds for Al-Qaeda. They were all mostly military-age men, very few women, very few children. The children that we were seeing were 140,000 per year unaccompanied minors. The other piece that is the NGO piece. I don't think the average American, and I was very vocal about this through the Biden administration. As a matter of fact, I went out and said, hey, when these folks are being caught and released, they're given a cell phone, a plane ticket to wherever they want to go, and a credit card. I got hammered. Everybody was saying, oh, this isn't true. And the government says it's not true. And I said, of course the government says it's not true, because they use the money from the Shelter in Place Act through DHS, and they give that money to NGOs. And the NGOs are the ones giving them cell phones, hotel rooms, plane tickets, and even gift cards. And right after I did that, there was an article that came out that said $1.6 billion had been spent by the UN in global human migration into our country. And to take it even further, I don't think the average American understands that these same NGOs that are being funded with our tax dollars, we're not just here on our border and in, like the Catholic Charities or the No Mas Muertes or No More Deaths. There's a bunch of different ones that they had. Those were also in the Darien Gap in Panama, where they were receiving people and preparing people and giving them the necessities that they needed to make the next phase of the trip up to the United States. I just don't think the average American understands how complicit these NGOs were in
and how
the
sophisticated the network
and
is.
how sophisticated the network is. And unfortunately, much to the dismay of all of us, we paid for it.
Yeah, and I would say one thing when what the Trump administration did with USAID and pulling the veil back on that, that did more to open people's eyes on how their tax dollars were being used for nefarious reasons, almost more than anything else. I mean, we've been, as an organization, talking about this in Arizona for years, and it's kind of, because it's so complicated and opaque, it's hard for people to get their arms around it. Yeah. It was good to see that, and from that, at least from our organization's perspective, we're going to keep highlighting this because it's something important. It's part of making sure we doge government. Our tax dollars should not be going towards political activities.
No. And I will tell you, a lot of the money that was going to these NGOs was being processed through other NGOs and going right back into people like Act Blue and other politicians' pockets, because it is really hard to track that money when it goes from one charity to another to another. It becomes almost impossible to track that money. And ultimately, these types of dollars end up back. And we've seen some of the just the beginnings of these investigations. I wish they would do more on it. And I wish Doge was kind of on that track. I would like to have seen Doge dive into a lot more of that, because I think you would see, I'm not a big believer that these politicians make all their money off of insider trading. I think where a lot of the money was coming from was NGOs.
Oh, you're 100% right.
Money going to NGOs, passed to a couple of other NGOs, and right back into their pockets. And that's how people like Ilhan and Omar go from 30,000 net worth to 30 million net worth and claim it was because you started a winery.
Yeah, it's a lot of that. NGOs are created, they get taxpayer funds. Friends and family sit on the board. They get paid big salaries to do 5 hours of work a year. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of it is very nefarious, very unseemly, and I think more that we can shine a light on it, the better. So one last question on the misconception, or at least what's going on as far as the border crackdown, the surprise detention facility. I'd like to get your take on that, because that's received a lot of media attention over the last couple of months here in Arizona. Looks like we needed a facility to process a lot of the detentions that are being made here in Arizona. What's your take on it? How did the federal government handle it? And do you think what they've done with that facility is the right approach for the Trump administration for the border crackdown here?
I do, because when you take these folks and you take somebody that's in this country illegally, where are you going to put them initially? You have to have a processing plant for before processing, especially now that the left is saying, we got to have due process for everybody, right? So now they've forced us to now have to hold these folks for a little bit longer to be able, before you can remove them. Where are you going to put them? We don't have the space in our jails. I probably had the most space in my jail. And if my jail was in tip-top shape in Pinal County, I could have handled maybe 500 of them. And most jails don't have the ability to hold them.
The one thing I bring up about this over and over again, this gets brought up, and people are like, oh, do we need this big detention facility? I bring up, well, what do you think the Biden administration did when obviously they weren't trying to catch a lot of people, but they had so many people they were dealing with, they were taking up hotels.
Yes.
Those are the detention facilities, where hotels and communities and neighborhoods all throughout the state of Arizona.
That's a great point. You're exactly right. Those places were really kind of those detention facilities. And contrary to what these people say, those detention facilities are not. They treat these people very well. Mm-hmm. They treat them better than our inmates get treated at a jail. Where the facility, the ICE facility in Florence, has a soccer field, has a soda machine, has a whole bunch of stuff for people that broke the law and came into this country illegally. And so you've got to have some place that you can put these folks, and you're not just putting them one on top of another. And really, the left, in their efforts to try to stop this, has created the need for these facilities, because we can't just take them and send them back to their country. Now we've got to hold them and go through this whole process. And so I think you need it. And I think the Surprise is a great place for it. Arizona is going to be a place where we're going to have quite a few people that are in this country illegally. And I think that most taxpayers get it. But you got these small groups and the media that want to be very antagonistic against it. And really, it's not what the average American thinks. I think the average American, probably to the tune of about 70%, support these types of measures.
Now, you mentioned before, we get the border secure. What are other elements within our immigration system that can be improved? I think one of the biggest impediments, at least from the right and from conservatives, has been any discussion that you want to have about how our immigration system operates runs into a brick wall because of just lack of trust on border security. People are just like, why should we believe you're ever going to do anything if you can't secure the border? And so I've always believed it's hard to even have that conversation unless we secure our border. But we do get to a point of that where we have security. Are there things that you would want to look at, or you think need to be looked at, to improve our immigration system in general that can run better, more smoothly for people that do want to come to this country potentially legally, or want to participate in the American dream?
Well, part of the reason why our immigration system is broken is because the immigration system's complex and stupid, like the tax code. Mm-hmm. You know, they don't make it very easy. So, for example, I've been in D.C. now that I'm running for Congress, CD5. Now that I'm out there, I'm talking to the cotton growers, I'm talking to the construction organizations, I'm talking to all these different organizations. They're like, look, they make it so impossible for us to be able to get people to help us. We would love to bring them here legally and have them have some type of work visa to where the employer becomes somewhat responsible. We can vet these people, bring them in. We need something like that in place. But because the system is broken, then the NGOs take advantage of it, and so do the cartels. They take advantage of this broken system, and they encourage people to bypass it and cut the line. And it's disingenuous to the people that actually went through the right way. And it's also disingenuous to the American people, because ultimately we pay a heavy price. What you get a lot of is people will say, well, what about all the good people in the country? What about them? Well, here's the problem. Even the good people, okay? They broke the law when they came into this country illegally, which, by the way, if you do that in another country, there's heavy prices to pay in most cases. But they broke the law to come in here. If you're in this country illegally and you're driving a car, you're driving without a license. If you don't have a license, you don't have insurance. Your registration is probably, some shadiness going on there. You're working under the table, so you're probably not paying taxes like the rest of us. If you are working, you may be using somebody else's Social Security number, frauding it. We have a lot of fraud with the IRS where people are filing on behalf of somebody else. So these good folks, even they compound one infraction and crime after another, and we cannot have that. Like, it's just not, you can't have a good society if all of a sudden we turn a blind eye and say, we're not going to hold you accountable because you broke the law. But there has to be some balance here where we hold people accountable, but we create an opportunity for those who will be beneficial to our country and give ourselves an opportunity to vet them and give companies an opportunity to hire people and be able to not affect what the average American can make on a minimum wage, because the market is full of people that are in this country illegally.
Yeah.
I think it'll also help us on our housing crisis. There's a lot of benefit to fixing this. And I think you can start by loosening up or expanding our ability for businesses to bring in workforce if they need it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and one of the things you described about that, even if people that, maybe they say they're doing, they're here, they're not trying to break any laws when they're here. Yes, they did break a law when they crossed the country. But when I talk to people that have come to this country legally, went through the process, they get furious that they ended up having to go through the process and did that, and other people from their perspective cut in line.
Yeah.
And cut ahead of them. And I can understand that as a fairness issue, and I don't like the law breaking, but I don't like how unfair that is either. Everybody should have to follow the same process and the same rules.
That's right. I don't like line cutting. And frankly, I spent my career enforcing laws. And these laws were put in place by the same politicians who actually throw fuel on the fire. Mm-hmm. They're the ones that made these laws. And albeit those laws haven't been updated in years, because Congress has really become feckless and really become ineffective. And they should be the most powerful branch of government. But because they want to get reelected, they don't want to tackle the tough issues like immigration or border security or welfare or any of those issues. And we've got to have people that are going to be willing to tackle these issues. And I still think, to this whole conversation we're having today, that border security and immigration is still one of the top priorities for the majority of Americans in this country. And trust me, I spent a lot of time outside of the state of Arizona, going and visiting sheriffs, being involved in national organizations for law enforcement and sheriffs. And these folks are having problems in their communities, no matter how far inland they are in this country, especially on the northern border. It's become a real hub for drug trafficking. And a lot of the terrorists that have been caught, that are on the terrorist watch list, have been caught at the northern border. So these are issues that it's not unique to Arizona or California or Texas. The rest of the country is now feeling the impact. And so I tell you firsthand, anybody out there that doesn't believe this, it is an issue all across this country, and Americans still see this as one of the top priorities.
You mentioned Congress. You're running for Congress. CD5, that's actually my district out in the East Valley. I know we met, this is probably a little over a year ago. I asked you then, are you thinking about doing it? You said, I'm on the fence. I don't know. But you took the plunge.
I did.
Took the plunge. So what led you to decide to do it? Why did you decide to run for Congress, Mark?
Look, it wasn't on my list of things to do. I'm not a politician. I'm not aspiring to have a political office. I loved being sheriff. I think it's the greatest elected office. But even that I did because I wanted to serve the people and serve the people that worked at the sheriff's office. And I think I did that very well over the 8 years I was there. But while you become in law enforcement, you are conditioned to meet the enemy on the battlefield. You're conditioned to run towards the fire. And I just couldn't in good conscience stand there knowing that I'm capable of doing something. And I think that I am the type of elected official that I want. And what kind of man am I if I stand there and wait for somebody else to do it? So in the end, I think it's my patriotism and my drive to serve others that really got me back in here. I am not there. I'm for term limits. I'm not there to try to take advantage of what we see so many of our elected officials do. I'm there to represent the American people. And I want to fight for reduced government. I want to fight for border security. I think that's important. I want to make sure that the rule of law is respected, that people that break that are held accountable. I want to make sure that we don't see any more fraud in our government, which is out of control. And I think that being a sheriff, not only does it give me the experience to restore balance and order to chaos, I think it conditions me to run towards the fire. And so ultimately, when you say, why am I in it? I mean, I'm meeting the enemy on the battlefield. And I think we need more cowboy hats and belt buckles in Washington, D.C. is what I always say. More common sense, more honor, more integrity, more courage.
Sheriff Lamb, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us here in the State Room, where we look to cover issues and events that are key to Arizona and that will keep Arizona free. Thank you.